Hey everybody, it's EJ from eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to be going over iridescent textures in Cinema 4D. So we're going to build a scene, we're going to recreate this fun little wavy band scene that's on the screen right now, and show you how I textured it using Cinema 4D. So let's hop to it. Alright, so let's go ahead and recreate this little wavy band scene that I got right here. So let's just delete everything. Boom, gone. Boom, delete the textures, get out of interactive render region. So for the wavy bands, basically what I did was I just created a cube, and we're just going to make this into like a band. So let's make this about 150, do about 10, and then let's do like 3,000. And the important thing is that we want to have some rounding, because when we apply some textures, we want this to have some really nice curves to kind of play with the reflections and play with the iridescence texture that we're going to put on here, due to the fact that the iridescence texture is going to play with like the specular. So let's actually, before I go any further, let me just go ahead and just create the iridescence texture. So I'm just going to click a material here, and the first fun part is, how do you spell iridescence? Well, it's Iridescent, and that's just kind of how I remembered that. And basically where you want to, or how you create an iridescent texture, is by loading a C4D shader into the specular channel. And the C4D shader that is going to give us this nice little spectral gradient stuff that really plays with the specularity in the scene is called the Spectral Shader. So you can find it in Effects, Spectral, and you're going to want to load that into your layer color channel in your reflectance channel. So in R, I believe 15 and above, you're going to load it in the layer color shader. If you just have R15 or below, you're just going to load it into your specular channel. So here we have our spectral. Let's go ahead and apply that to our object here. And you're probably not going to see anything right away. So let's actually give some nice curviness to our object here. So let's go and give this a nicer blue color as well. You're really not going to notice the spectral, but let's go into the spectral here. Let's go into interactive render region so we can see what's going on here, see what the actual render is going to look like. And you can see that we have a little gradient happening here. Now let's just go and see if we can crank this up and see anything. We can't see anything yet. So again, so we can see a little bit, but we're going to make this nice and wavy, make a nice curved surface to be really able to see what's going on here even more. So let's go ahead, let's get, so you can do the curvy, wavy band stuff bunch of different ways. I have a tutorial about how I did it with splines and stuff like that. But I'm just going to use a wind deformer for this. I just wanted to make this really quick and easy. And I'm going to have to rotate this. And let's see, I'm going to need to up the segments in the Z here. And again, this is the wind deformer's facing the wrong direction, so let's rotate this 90 degrees. And now we have this nice wavy band thing happening. And let's just bring down that amplitude. And we're getting to see a little bit, I'm probably not sure if you guys can see this, but we're getting a little bit of this nice iridescence colors happening. But let's keep going a little further here with the wind deformer. Change that amplitude. Let's turn off flag. We don't want this to be a flag. We're going to turn off all the turbulence in the Y direction. We just want it in the X. You can see we're getting nice wavy band stuff happening now. And let's see. Let's start playing around with this the spectral shader. So we got our spectral shader loaded up in the texture, and the first thing we're going to play around with is this intensity. And you can see that if I keep jacking this up, nothing's really happening. And this is because since it's loaded in our specular channel, our specular is pretty wimpy right now. And you can see that it's just a little bump. So what we're going to do, I'm going to get out of our specular legacy, this little blend. I'm going to go to Beckman. Now what Beckman's going to do is kind of give us the same kind of thing, but we can really spread out the roughness here and increase the strength of our specular. And you can see that we're getting a little bit of color in here. So let's go back into our spectral. And again, a lot of this is going to be driven, a lot of the spectral stuff is going to show up depending on how strong your specular strength is and stuff like this. So if you're playing around with the spectral and you're really trying to crank up this intensity, it could be because you need to adjust your specular in your reflectance channel. So let's bring this down. It's a little bit too hot. And now we can just start playing around. And you can see you're getting a little bit of green as I'm moving around. Again, this is based on the specular of your scene. So right now we just have some default light. So it's going to change depending on where we have our camera. So you can see right above, we're really seeing a lot of those really nice colors that we have in here. So let's add some more stuff into our scene, just so we have a lot more stuff to play around with. The first thing I want to do, let's go ahead and just quickly add some reflection. Let's do some additive. There we go. Got some reflection in our scene now. Let's do some for now. And cool. So just so we have a little bit of reflection going on. And there we go. Now let's go ahead and we got our band. What I want to do is add some segments in the X, just so we have a little bit more geometry here to play with to get a lot more curvy stuff happening, and we're getting a little jagged edges there. So let's increase the Z segments even more. That's looking good, nice and smooth. Got the nice iridescence texture happening. Let's go and throw this in a cloner. So we got our ribbon. It's in our cloner. Again, the size is 150 centimeters in the X. So we're going to zero out the Y. We're going to do 150 in the X. Zoom out and increase the count. We'll make a field of these little wavy bands. Let's zoom in here, and basically this is going to be your angle. And for this scene, I decided I wanted to create a parallel camera. I'm just going to look through this, and this is going to be like a little like SimCity kind of view, like camera view. It's kind of fun. I like the little SimCity view. Let's actually turn this down to 100. And I just want to see more bands in my scene, so let's zoom. Let's create a couple more here and center it so we have a full mess of these bands. Cool. So that's looking good. Now I want to actually single out some of these bands and actually make some that are way more distorted, so we can kind of tell the difference between just some slight waviness and how the iridescent texture affects it in some very extremely wavy bands, to see how the specular plays with those curvy surfaces, and see the difference between the flatter ones and the more wavy ones, and the iridescence and how it's applied. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's just choose like 3 of these wavy bands, 3 of these clones. Let me just make this a little bit wider here, interactive render region here. And let's go ahead. We're going to go and grab the MoGraph selection tag. We're going to select 3 of these clones, and that made our MoGraph selection tag. And with that selected, I'm going to go up to the MoGraph effectors and get a volume effector and just turn off visibility. And that will hide those 3 clones. So now I can go ahead and grab, just go ahead and get our cube and duplicate it. And we're just going to fill in the gaps with these other cubes here, or these other bands. So for the wind, what I want to do with these ones are make the amplitude even higher. We can introduce some turbulence in here. And we can actually use a fall off. Let's use a box fall off. We can actually just make a single little piece of. Whoop, I'm actually adjusting the strength there, I believe, or the amplitude. I'm just going to adjust the fall off here. So we have a little slice of wavy band here. So again, we're just going to kind of see how the wavy bit, the even wavier band looks with the iridescent. So we got that. Let's duplicate this and fill in these gaps here. There we go, and one more. There we are. And for these ones, we can adjust, kind of make these a little bit more, add more variety by adjusting the size and the frequency here, and the turbulence, something like that maybe. Maybe even move around the fall off here. Let's do the same thing with this one. Yep. And let's adjust the turbulence, the size, the frequency. We get some more different stuff happening. And cool. So I think that's about different enough. Yeah, sure. That looks good. Let's stick with that. And actually, let's go to our main one. I want to have this maybe more in the center. So let's do frequency and just move it a bit over. Cool. All right. So we have all our bands. We have our segments up. We have our fillet radiuses. So we have a little bit of rounded edges. Let's make this just a tad bit thicker and make our edges even more rounded, just so we can see a little bit more of the play of the iridescence texture. And now, again, we have that reflection. So let's actually put in a HDR environment so we can actually get some nice reflections in here. Get the HDR Studio. Let's turn off the floor. We'll keep the background on though. And now we have some really nice reflections. So let's jump back into our Spectral Shader and just start playing around. So the intensity, again, is the overall intensity of all of those colors. And the variation, now the variation is very important as well. So intensity is how bright your this gradient is, your spectrum gradient. The variation is basically the size of this gradient. So you'll notice, if you see in the preview, if I bring this below 100, we're actually losing we're actually scaling down our gradient. So as I scale this down enough, it's kind of just getting the blue and the white. And if I increase this above 100%, we're just kind of making our gradient even smaller. And the reason why that is, and it's not like continuing or anything, is because the out of range type is set to stop. And what that means is when this gradient's done, no matter how much you scale it with the variation, it's going to constrain to just that, and it's not going to repeat itself or anything. So luckily, this looks pretty boring. You're losing a lot of colors. What we can do is either mirror it or tile it. So you can play around with those and get more of those like rainbow spectrum colors in there, which is really fun. And again, notice on the default spectrum gradient that some of these gradient knots are pretty tight. Like there's not a lot of smooth gradation between these two knots. So we can also just, when we create our own, keep that in mind, where we can have this nice variation between the smoothness or the interpolation between each of these colors in our gradient. So I don't like these colors, so let's go ahead and create our own gradient here. So let's do a little like pastelish kind of stuff. Let's get some like pink. Let's get some like light blue. And again, a lot of this stuff is going to reflect on whatever color, this base color we have here. So keep that in mind, because it's just going to apply it on top of the texture and your color, just with the specular. So let's get some blue. Let's get some. Let's see, let's get some purple, get some yellow, there we go, boom, and we can again adjust all these and again play around with the knots and how much of each is in here. So we got a little bit of white in here. This is looking pretty cool. So let's see what it looks like with mirroring, so you can kind of see the difference here. So we got this really nice iridescent kind of look. Again, we can change the color of our object and completely kind of change how everything how everything looks. That looks pretty cool, actually. Some like hot pink stuff going on, or some blue. That looks cool too. Let's stick with that, and let's go to our specular. Let's maybe make our specular a little more roughness. We get a little bit more of our gradient here. Let's go to our cube. What I want to do is increase the segments here so you can see the difference. So right now we have a little bit rounded, and that's due to like the fong on our cube. So let's add more segments in the X, and that'll actually flatten out our iridescence. And you can see that this is looking really dang, it's pretty dang cool, if you ask me. And we can adjust the fillet radius here as well. And you can get some really nice cool edges. So just look at how cool that looks right there. Like really nice, kind of like chrome almost looking. So this iridescence, the spectral shader is a lot of fun. Add some really cool texture to your, some like specular to your object. So again, this is in the specular channel. So this is going to change based on where you're viewing your object, and also by the lights in your scene. So right now we just have the default light. So we can go ahead and add like a area light here. Let's go ahead and let's go ahead and here's our area light. Let's move this over here, face this way, move it up like so. Sure, cool, that looks good. And let's have just another light over here, kind of like a fill, like that. Nice. And right now everything's way too bright, so let's just bring down the intensity, bring it down. Let's just kind of reframe our composition here. Cool. Looking good. I'm liking that. And again, we can kind of play around. Like a lot of this is just your objects and how the curves of your objects are going to play with the specular, and therefore play with the spectral shader there. So this is looking pretty dang cool. We have our HDR Studio. We can go ahead and, so we have just a little bit of, let's just iridescent. We can go around, and again, just by changing this color, we totally change how things look, because our spectral is on top of this object. So, just by changing this, you might want to go in and like change the texture or the colors of the gradient there. So, or even just, changing how sharp your specular highlight is. So now we just have very sharp highlights on here. And again, changing the attenuation from like additive, like, so let's just see how this looks with the additive. And then we have average. So I mean, that changes everything too. That actually brings in some more of the colors, but it's a little bit muddy. So kind of play around with how, like the blending mode you use with the attenuation, stuff like that. And again, just the specular strength overall. So now we're getting more of the actual color of our object back. And so we can adjust the specular, and then if we have a very high specular, and we're like, we really like the specular, but the colors are a little bit too bright, we can go into the intensity of our actual spectral and kind of bring all that down. So you can control it two ways. And again, this is kind of like how big is our gradient. So the smaller it goes, the bigger your gradient is mapped on here. And the higher this number, the more knots of your gradient are going to be applied here. And then we have the CD effect, and the CD effect is more for like rounded objects. It kind of gives you can see exactly what's happening as we have this really nice, and it's remember CDs, compact discs, so we get this nice little like spectral distortion that's happening, or like prismatic distortion, because of this stuff, and that can be a lot of fun to play around with as well. So we have the width that we can play with. That looks kind of cool, but again, we have this little circular thing in here, so it looks kind of weird on a flat object. So you can play around with all this kind of stuff. The W factor is kind of how wide that spectral band is going to be. So you can see as you widen it, you lose some of that roundness. So this actually looks pretty cool because you're not seeing that like circular gradient kind of thing. And that like adds these really nice glints as well. So this is pretty cool. Adding the CD effect and this diffusion kind of like blurs everything out a little bit more. And this kind of brings the sharp little prism effect back. Diffuse variation kind of brings back some of like rainbowish colors into your object. And then you can play with like the front side. So what is the front side of your object going to be? You can see that this kind of has these sharp little bands that happen now, which is pretty cool. This adds a nice extra layer of fun iridescence to your object. So that's just really cool. That really nice highlight. It adds a nice like little organic kind of element back into the scene. So let's reset that to default. I'm going to keep that on. I'm going to keep that on, the CD effect. Let's see. Let's just play around with this just a little bit more. Let's maybe bring the width up, bring the intensity down. So basically all I want is that nice little highlight that we have from that in there. The peak is kind of going to blur that a little bit more. Cool. Looking really good. And variation. You really can't tell what's going on there because the colors are kind of washed out, but that affects like the rainbow variation of the color. You can kind of see. Cool. I think I'm liking everything here. I'm not sure about this yellow though. Maybe turn this to like a green. Let's see what that looks like. Actually, that kind of, I don't like that. Let's go to like an orange. Kind of adjusting these gradients here too kind of adds a lot. Maybe just turn this to white. What will that do? Doesn't really change too much. Let's see what tiling does. See if we like that better. That's kind of cool. I like getting this nice variation of that purple in there. Maybe make that a sharp knot. So I could play around with this forever, but you can really see how much fun you can have playing with just the gradients and how that totally changes how your like iridescence, specular iridescence is going to work inside the specular, inside the spectral shader here. So again, you can play around with the actual roughness of your specular highlights, your specular strength overall. Make this a lot brighter, so you can mess around with tons and loads of stuff. So let's see. So I think this is looking pretty good. The only thing I want to add, I'm not going to add any shadows, but what I am going to add just to finish this off is some ambient occlusion. And I just made it a little bit lighter than the black that it normally is. And let's just see, because I just want to get a little bit more definition between the bands, so you can see that's being added right there. Get some really nice shading. Looking good. So that is basically, and you can play around with a bunch of different objects. So this is a flat object. Let's see what this would look like with like a sphere. So let's bring our sphere into view here. There we go. And let's just apply that texture. And this is probably going to look completely different because this is a spherical object. And because we have that CD, what was that called? Use the CD effect. Because it's kind of probably not mapped correctly for a spherical object right now. It looks kind of cool, but you can see how you could use the same effect for like maybe a bubble kind of thing. So if we, if you really want to get fun, you can add some transparency in here. like so. Let's turn off the reflections and the total internal reflections and exit reflections and really get some cool stuff happening. You can even see that by turning on the transparency, although we didn't change the color at all, we're getting more of this pink that's in our spectral gradient. So that is pretty dang cool. You can see that just turning on the transparency kind of totally changes how everything looks. I really like that. So you can see how we can, if we mess around with that a little bit more, we can probably get like a nice little bubble that has, like, you know, when you blow bubbles in your little bubble container thing with the soap, you know, if you mess around with that, that could look pretty bubbly. Some soapy bubbles, but we'll save that for another day. All right, so that is how you make an iridescent material using the Spectral Shader inside of Cinema 4D. So if you create anything with it, be sure to share with me. I'd love to see what you guys are coming up with. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.